Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching The World Report. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Israel confirms that the body slated for return yesterday was not that of hostage Shiri Bibas. Israel accuses Hamas of violating the ceasefire agreement and demands the immediate return of Shiri and all remaining hostages. A series of 3 public buses have exploded in Tel Aviv in a suspected terror attack. No casualties have so far been reported, and Israeli authorities discovered 2 additional devices that failed to detonate. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy calls for stronger ties with the United States following a meeting with US Envoy Keith Kellogg in Kyiv. This appeal comes amid criticism from Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who accused Zelenskyy of being despised by the Ukrainian people. The US Senate begins a series of votes to boost Donald Trump's agenda with a $340 billion budget blueprint. Kash Patel is also confirmed as FBI director. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy met with US Envoy Keith Kellogg in Kyiv amid a push to end the war. Following the meeting, Zelenskyy said it was important for Ukraine to maintain strong ties with the United States. Whereas Kellogg said the goal of the trip was to listen to Ukraine's concerns and report back on them to the White House. Meanwhile, Elon Musk doubled down on his criticism of Zelenskyy, backing Donald Trump's latest attack on the Ukrainian leader. He said that it was right of Trump to keep Zelenskyy out of the peace talks. As the criticism against the Ukrainian president builds, European allies Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer have planned visits to Washington. The duo will be meeting Trump to defend Ukraine's stance in the negotiations. Joining us to discuss this evolving situation on the Russia and Ukraine peace talks, we're first joined by Alexander Kryev, who is a senior lecturer at the Kyiv Molia Academy, expert at Ukrainian prison think tank, joining us from Kyiv. Thank you very much for your time, Alexander. I'd first like to look at the response that we're getting from America and specifically what we've seen from Elon Musk and Donald Trump in the last 24 hours. The rhetoric that has been used to describe Volodymyr Zelenskyy, saying that the Ukrainian people do not support him. Is that something you agree with?
That's definitely a lot of frustration with the latest remarks of Donald Trump and of Elon Musk concerning Ukraine, concerning Ukrainian struggle against Russian aggression. This frustration is understandable, but at the same time, I do not think that Ukrainians are utterly dismissing Donald Trump as an ally and as a leader of the free world. Of course, we see a lot of memes. Of course, we see a lot of social distrust to him as an institutional partner, but there is a great deal of understanding that without the United States, without the support from our American partners, the security of Ukraine will be jeopardized. And there is a great understanding that all the support provided during the last nearly 3 years was inalienable with the success of Ukrainian armed forces and with the existence of Ukraine as it is. So basically, it's no more than a quarrel or misunderstanding between Ukrainians and Trump, Ukrainians and Elon Musk. We did see that Trump can be positive on Ukraine, on weapons, on supporting Ukrainian statehood and everything else. So it is necessary to understand that Trump is unpredictable, both for Ukraine and for Russia as well.
Something that's come out overnight is a comment from Mike Waltz, who is the White House press secretary and, of course, national security advisor. He has said that the mineral deal that Trump has suggested should be signed by Zelenskyy. Zelenskyy, on the other hand, has, of course, said that he does not want to sell his country. Alexander, given the support that has been given to Ukraine, is it in Zelenskyy's best interest to make sure this deal does get done?
It is definitely in our best interest to make this deal a working document, but at the same time, there are different types of deal, you know. The Ukrainian proposal is that there should be a common enterprise comprised 50-50% with Ukrainian and American capital, with Ukrainian Ukrainian personnel, Ukrainian working force, American capital, and American technologies. This can work well for the Americans. So it's basically not given all the rare earth minerals and all the metallurgy to the Americans. It's definitely creating a new investment opportunity for them. In this regard, yes, this deal might work. But as it is presented by Trump, I'm not sure he is right on the numbers. Because during the last 3 years, the United States provided more than $70 billion for Ukraine, both in weapons and microfinancial support. It is not $500 billion that Trump is talking about. So basically, I think it is more an issue of math and is more an issue of business negotiation than the political one.
Also joining us to discuss this topic is Gilbert Doctorow, a Russian affairs expert who's joining us from Brussels in Belgium. Gilbert, thank you very much for being here. I'd like to bring back to you the point that was made by Trump and Musk in terms of their support for Zelensky. Do you think that this is a clear shift now in the US and their support for either side in this war?
It's a shift in the US policy, but it's not a shift in the thinking of Donald Trump. Everything that has happened in the last 7 days was very closely coordinated and had one purpose: to keep the war parties of the EU and of Ukraine away from the peace talks, because the participation of any of the EU countries and institutions, or the participation of Mr. Zelensky's group, has only one purpose: to foil the creation of a peace treaty that will be signed and is durable. There is no confusion here. Mr. Trump understands perfectly that the mineral deal is a non-issue. The mineral deal is there to be rejected by the Ukrainians, so that Mr. Trump can say they have not expressed an interest in peace and in a final settlement. Just as the questionnaire sent to the Europeans, how many troops they will put up to enforce the peace if one is signed, was not serious. It was serious for them. It was serious for Washington. Washington wanted them to fail. They failed. And therefore, there's no reason for them to be present at the peace talks. There is no confusion in the mind of Mr. Trump and his close advisors. What each of them is doing, whether it's Waltz or Hegseth or Witkoff, it's all perfectly coordinated with everything that Trump is saying.
In terms of Russia's desire for a peace deal, is it something that you think is sincere? Hundreds of drones released overnight, killing so far 6 civilians in Ukraine. Also a continued fight on the front lines. Why is it in Vladimir Putin's interest to sign a peace deal when it seems on the surface that his army is doing better than the Ukrainian?
Well, it's not on the surface. It's all the way down to the bottom. The Ukrainian army is not destroyed. The Ukrainian army is not humiliated or on the point of running from the battlefield. I want to be perfectly clear in saying that there have been successes on the Ukrainian side in recruiting the young, newly admitted to service generation of 18 to 25. The Ukrainians do have arms. The Biden administration shipped them a massive amount of arms before it left office. Therefore, the Ukrainian situation at present is not hopeless, but to continue it is to destroy the Ukrainian nation, because, as you say, the Russians have a preponderance of force, and there's no reason for them not to use it. When you are in this situation where there's no peace negotiation, there is no reason for you to stop fighting. And the Russians are pressing that point, that the only logical action for Ukraine is capitulation if it wants to exist as a nation, and if it wants to have a demography that is sustainable. The Ukrainians have lost more than half of their population. It was a 40 million man and woman country. It is now an 18 million man and woman country. If this continues, it will be a zero population country, as Mr. Trump clearly stated. Time to stop fighting, and the first to make the move will be the Ukrainians by getting rid of Mr. Zelensky and his war party.
Gilbert, I want to challenge you on a couple of things that you said there. Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been talking about engaging in a peace deal for some months now. Also, he has said that he wants to be part of these talks with Russia. So in that instance, is Zelenskyy not looking towards a peace deal? And would it not be helpful if he was part of discussions with Russian leaders rather than being put on the side?
We have seen all of his so-called peace initiatives over the last year. His idea of a peace deal is that the loser, Ukraine, will take all of the advantages that the winner expects to get. He wants to impose reparations. He wants to impose a withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukraine. He's behaving as if he won the war. Those so-called peace terms are not peace terms. They are unrealistic, totally unrealistic. They are delusional. And the only victim in this is the Ukrainian nation that is bleeding because of Mr. Zelenskyy's tenacious hold on power. To look at opinion polls in Ukraine today is meaningless when they have no free press, none. The only journalists who existed for the last 2 years in Ukraine were on US aid money. As they say, they were propagandists paid by the Biden administration. The Ukrainians have had no chance to look at the reality facing them on the ground and in the world at large. Therefore, their opinions are unfortunately underinformed, and they are not capable of responding to BBC journalists who ask them what they think about Zelenskyy. The country is at the breaking point, and Mr. Zelenskyy doesn't give a damn. He will be happy to see more millions die so long as he holds power. That
Alexander, sorry to cut you off, Gil, but we only have a minute left, and I'd like to bring in Alexander just for his response to what you said there.
Well, the short response, of course, I do respect a lot of opinions that Mr. Gilbert said, but unfortunately half of that is still propagandish stuff concerning free press or the absence of free press, which is totally not true, concerning the not willingness of Ukrainians to fight, which is also not true. We started this war because Russians attacked, not because Zelenskyy wanted it. We start killing Russians en masse because Russians are the aggressor, not Zelenskyy. And basically, we don't give a damn who the president is. We're not Russians. We're not following the leader. We're following our country and our freedom. So basically, it's not the issue of Zelenskyy or somebody else. It's the issue of Russians just getting the hell out of here, or at least stop their aggression unprovoked and totally non-legit for this type of the diplomacy. So basically, it's all about Ukrainian survival and nothing more. It's not about politics. Politics are not as important for Ukrainians as for Russians. But of course, Russians do not have any sufficient politics of themselves.
Alexander Kryev and Gilbert Doxrow, thank you both for joining us for that insightful discussion. We will, of course, cover the next few days, weeks and potentially months as this situation continues to develop. We now move on, and Israel is investigating a bus blast in Tel Aviv. Out of the 5 reported, 2 of the devices failed to explode. There have been no casualties and the search for suspects has started. Authorities have already called for an action, suspecting it to be a terror attack. Let's find out more in this report.
3 buses have exploded in Bat Yam, south of Tel Aviv, in what Israeli police say is a suspected terror attack. No casualties have been reported. Footage on social media showed at least 1 bus on fire in a parking lot, with a large plume of smoke rising above. Devices in 2 other buses failed to explode. Meanwhile, officers are still trying to locate more bombs in Tel Aviv.
אני יכול להגיד שסרקנו את כל הרכבות ואת כל האוטובוסים בעזרת הנהגים. נכון לעכשיו הסתיימה הסריקה גם ברכבות וגם באוטובוסים, ואנחנו מנסים להבין בכמה חשודים מדברים.
Transport Minister Miri Regev paused all buses, trains and light rail trains in the country so that checks for explosive devices could be carried out. According to local media, one of the unexploded devices, weighing 5 kilograms, carried a message saying revenge from Tulkarem, referring to a recent Israeli military counter-terrorism operation in the West Bank. In response, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered the Israeli military to carry out an intensive operation against centers of terrorism in the West Bank. He also ordered the police and the Israel Security Agency to increase preventative activity against additional attacks in Israeli cities. Amid the tensions due to the recent hostage handover by Hamas and the fragile Gaza ceasefire, what could these attacks mean? Bureau Report, NewsX.
We'll now take a look at the latest updates coming in from across the Indo-Pacific. Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong warned international airlines flying between Australian airports and New Zealand to beware of Chinese warships. This warning was issued after observing China conducting a live fire exercise in the Tasman Sea. Australian military ships and planes have been monitoring the Chinese warships for days as they pass in international waters off the Australian east coast. Speaking on the size of the ocean, Wong added that they could have parked somewhere less inconvenient whilst they flexed their muscles. South Korean officials have asked the Trump administration to exclude their country from US plans to impose aggressive tariffs on trade partners. They emphasised that Seoul is already applying low duties on American products under the free trade agreement between the two nations. Korean Deputy Trade Minister Park Jong-won requested while travelling to Washington that South Korea be excluded from US plans. He aims to establish reciprocal tariffs with trade partners and raise duties for imports on steel and aluminium. He added the request to the Department of Commerce and the Office of US Trade Representative, but hasn't heard from them since. The leaders of Hong Kong's Democratic Party have announced plans to dissolve what was once the city's largest opposition group. Chairman Low King-Hay said members will soon vote whether to shut down the party. The Democratic Party has been struggling to survive following moves by China to crack down on dissent in the city in the wake of the 2019 protests. Beijing and Hong Kong's governments have argued that such moves were necessary for national security. Thailand is pushing for free trade agreement negotiations with Gulf countries to enhance trade, tourism and investment, according to Nalini Tivasin, chair of the Thai Trade Representatives. The Gulf countries represent Thailand's most important market in the Middle East. Last year, trade between the two sides amounted to approximately $36 billion. Non-oil and natural gas trade grew by nearly 10% and continues to show a positive trend. Chairperson Tavisin proposed that Thailand and the GCC focus on collaboration in tourism, food security and soft power areas. The Singapore government has launched a direct cash assistance program to provide financial support to residents facing economic challenges. Through this initiative, individuals can receive cash and range from $400 to $850, which will be directly credited to their bank accounts. This timely financial support aims to help recipients manage their cost of living and meet essential daily expenses. At least 8 civilians, including 3 children, have been killed in a UXO blast in Syria. As per a war monitor and the civil defence, the unexploded munition ignited at a house in the northwestern region of the country. Here is what we know about so far.
At least 8 civilians, including a woman and a child, have been killed when unexploded munitions ignited at a house in northwestern Syria. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported the deadly blast a day after another organization said 2/3 of Syrians risk being killed or wounded by unexploded ordnance. As per reports, the civil defense teams were retrieving bodies from the rubble of the destroyed house in Al-Nayrab on the outskirts of the main northern city of Aleppo. The observatory said the owner of the house was a scrap dealer who collected unexploded ordnance for its metal content. Some reports suggest that journalists were also not allowed to approach the site for fear of further explosions. In January alone, 125 unexploded ordnance accidents were recorded in which at least 85 people were killed and 152 injured, Humanity and Inclusion said. Meanwhile, UNDP calls for long-term investment to support recovery in Syria. Bureau Report NewsX.
Now for the latest from across the world of business. Nissan shares grow by 11% following reports that a Chinese group, including former Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, plans to approach Tesla for investment. The proposal aims to make Tesla a strategic investor with hopes it will acquire Nissan's US plants. This comes after Nissan's failed merger talks with Honda and a downgrade to junk status by Moody's due to weak profitability. The proposal, led by ex-Tesla board member Hiro Mizuno, could involve a consortium with Foxconn as a minority investor. US President Donald Trump and Japanese Premier Shigeru Ishiba discussed a $44 billion Alaska liquefied natural gas project aimed at boosting US-Japan energy ties and reducing Japan's reliance on the Middle East. The US proposed Japan invest in infrastructure and long-term contracts to avoid strategic choke points. South Korea and Taiwan are also considering increased LNG purchases from the US, reducing dependence on Russia and China. This initiative is part of Trump's broader strategy to strengthen energy security in East Asia amid trade tensions. European stocks hit record highs in February with strong earnings from banks and luxury sectors. Fourth quarter earnings rose by 5.4%, helped by a weaker euro and strong sales, with nearly 75% of companies surpassing revenue expectations. Despite this concern over US tariffs, especially on German autos and luxury goods, are creating uncertainty. European banks also saw significant profit gains, benefiting from higher margins and cost control measures. Asian markets have hit a 3-month peak led by Hong Kong and Chinese stocks, driven by optimism surrounding AI advancements, particularly the company DeepSeek. Gold stayed near record highs, benefiting from safe haven demand amid US-China tensions. Meanwhile, US markets faced a dip as concerns grew over the economy, particularly after Walmart's downbeat forecast. The dollar weakened for a third consecutive week, while the yen fell following Japan's inflation data, signalling potential rate hikes. Oil prices dipped, but were set for a weekly gain. The European Union aims to cut reliance on Russian gas by increasing imports from other countries like the US and accelerating renewable energy initiatives. EU Energy Commissioner Dan Jorgensen highlighted the need to stop funding Russia's war effort through fossil fuel payments. While gas will remain essential for some sectors, the EU seeks alternative sources. Additionally, the EU is working on stabilising energy prices by decoupling gas from electricity costs and securing long-term LNG contracts. The G20 foreign ministers meet in Johannesburg amid global tensions, with President Cyril Ramaphosa urging unity and diplomacy. The absence of US Secretary of State Marco Rubio highlighted deep divisions. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov attended the meeting as EU officials reiterated support for Ukraine. Ramaphosa called for cooperation to address global crises. Here's the latest in this report.
It is critical that the principles of the UN Charter, multilateralism and international law should remain at the center of all our endeavors. It should be the glue that keeps us together.
While sounding alarmed about the group's deepening divisions.
Our communications are good, and we will be building up all this as we continue addressing the issues that may appear to be difficult or challenges between us.
Top US diplomat and Secretary of State Marco Rubio was a notable absentee. When asked about his absence, Ramaphosa replied,
So this is not a boycott. This can be ascribed to a whole number of reasons, which he has stated, which we note. And we have resolved that we will, in the diplomatic process, be able to have those matters discussed, to have those matters dealt with, so that we are able to iron out wrinkles that may have appeared in our relationship.
The South African president said there is a lack of consensus among major powers, including in the G20, on how to respond to these issues of global significance. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov did attend the meeting, alongside officials from EU nations that have pledged continued support for Ukraine and condemned Russia's aggression. Ramaphosa reminded the attendees that cooperation is our greatest strength as the G20. We must continue to advocate for diplomatic solutions to conflicts. Bureau Report, NewsX.
We'll now take a look at the latest updates from across North America. 2 people are dead after 2 small aircraft collided mid-air at Marana Regional Airport in Arizona. Reports say that this airport is a host of flight training and does not have an operating air traffic control tower. A Cessna 172S and Lancair 360 Mark II collided where the flights that collided. Reports have told that Cessna landed and the Lancair crashed and burned near the other runway. The Mexican army says it has arrested a key player in the Sinaloa drug cartel. Jose Angel Canabia is accused of being the right man of one of the sons of infamous jailed drug lord El Chapo, according to reports. The Mexican security forces think that by arresting Canabia, they have caused a severe blow to the Sinaloa cartel. Several people from Venezuela and 3 immigrant right groups have sued President Donald Trump's administration. This was after the Department of Homeland Security gave its decision to end temporary protected status for around 350,000 Venezuelan immigrants. The US claims that it's not in the US national interest for the immigrants to remain in the country. As a result, 2 lawsuits were filed against the Trump administration. The Indian Congress raised questions over the deportation of several illegal Indian immigrants from the United States to Panama. According to reports, they think the immigrants should be sent back to India directly with dignity. This comes after 299 deportees, which includes Indians, were sent to Panama over the last week. They are being held there ill. They can be repatriated to their origin countries. That is all we have time for, but we'll be back very soon with more of your latest international news.